The Quran. 1. Was the Quran directly revealed by God or chosen by man? 2. Has the Quran been perfectly preserved or has it changed over the centuries? Torpedo 3. Written sources. What do Islamic sources say about the compilation of the Quran? The Standard Islamic Narrative, or SIN, claims that the Quran was first compiled by Abu Bakr in AD 632 to 634, who gave it to Muhammad's wife Hafsa. This was then copied by Uthman in AD 652. The main source for this is Bukhari, who died in 870, that is 250 years later. But other traditions give stories that differ from this official narrative. For example, some say Abu Bakr compiled the Quran with no input from his successor Umar, and others say that Umar compiled it with no help from Abu Bakr. Some say that Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, was the first to compile the Quran. Others say that Salim bin Makil compiled the Quran immediately after Muhammad's death. Others say that Aisha, the wife of Muhammad, had her own copy of the Quran. Islamic sources also talk about different versions of the Quran that were attributed to Muhammad's companions, that were used in different parts of the empire, and had different numbers of chapters from today's Quran, which is 114 chapters. For example, Ubay ibn Ka'b's Quran had 116 chapters and was used in Syria. Ibn Masud's Quran had 110 chapters and was used in Kufa. And Abu Musa's Quran was used in Basra. So even Islamic sources cannot agree on the Quran's origins. Muslims claim that the Quran has never changed from the time of Muhammad, but Islamic sources say otherwise. Bukhari Volume 8 says that verses were missing. Bukhari Volume 5 says verses were cancelled. Bukhari Volume 6 says verses were substituted. Sahih Muslim Volume 2 says verses were forgotten. Ibn Abi Dawud says verses were lost. Ibn Abi Dawud says that verses were overlooked. Ibn Abi Dawud says verses were modified. Muwatta ibn Malik says verses were changed. As-Sayuti says verses disappeared. And Sunan ibn Majah says some verses were eaten by a sheep. So in summary, Islamic sources say that verses were lost, disappeared, forgotten, cancelled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, and eaten by sheep. So their own sources confirm that the Quran was changed. Not Uthman, but Abdul Malik and Al-Hajjaj. Abdul Malik reigned from AD 685 to 705. Unlike his predecessors, he was the undisputed ruler with Al-Hajjaj as his strongman. He was the first Arab ruler to begin centralizing control of the Arab Empire and laid the foundations for what would later become Islam. Several Islamic sources claim that it was not Uthman but Abdul Malik, via his lieutenant Al-Hajjaj, who actually compiled the Quran and sent it to different cities in the empire. Christian sources from the 7th century make no mention of sacred writings that were used by the Arabs. They also make no mention of Muhammad or Uthman. Christian sources from the 8th and 9th centuries, such as Leo III, AD 730, Abram of Tiberias, AD 820, and Al-Kindi, AD 830, also claim that Al-Hajjaj compiled the Quran. And John of Damascus, 675 to 749 AD, and the monk of Bet Hail talk of chapters of today's Quran as separate books, not as a complete volume. John worked in the court of Abdul Malik, so if the Quran was indeed just one complete text, John would have known this. Why Abdul Malik? Because standardizing a religious text and producing copies of it for distribution requires not only a high degree of centralized control, but also financial backing. We can see this from Christian history. It was not until the Emperor Constantine the Great established Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century that we get the first complete copies of the New Testament on parchment. Before Constantine, the Christians simply did not have the ability to produce them. The same problem, that is the need for centralized control and finance, would have faced any Arab ruler who wanted to standardize and produce copies of an Arab scripture. Neither Umar, Uthman, or even Muawiyah would have had such resources. The only one in the 7th century with this kind of control was Abdul Malik. In this sense, we can look at Abdul Malik as the, quote, Arab Constantine, unquote. And the fact that non-Islamic sources claim that Abdul Malik was the creator of the Quran is further confirmation. Torpedo 3, the result. Islamic sources do not support the standard Islamic narrative claim of Uthman compiling the Quran. They give varying and contradictory accounts. They even suggest changes in the verses of the Quran. Islamic sources suggest that the Quran was first compiled by Abdul Malik. This makes historical sense as he was the first ruler with a kind of power to fund and control such an enterprise. Non-Islamic sources confirm that it was Abdul Malik, not Uthman, who compiled the Quran. They also suggest that the Quran was not a single book in the 7th century. So what do the written sources tell us? 1. The Quran was not sent down complete and unchanged to Muhammad in 632 and compiled complete by Uthman in 652. 2. The Quran was most likely pulled together by Abdul Malik between 685 and 705, first as separate writings and possibly only at the end as a single volume. So the evidence does not support the standard Islamic narrative or sin. Torpedo 3 scores a direct hit.